Some men don't break all at once.
You look beautiful.
They break slowly,
I missed
one
you.
ordinary Tuesday
Me
at a
too.
time, until the night something as simple as a porch light makes them wonder if they were ever really alone. Logan Mercer drove into Clover Hill with $37 in his wallet, a 6-year-old asleep in the back seat, and the quiet, suffocating knowledge that every single person who had ever known his name from birth was now buried in the ground. The house his parents left him sat dark at the end of Sycamore Street. Every house on that block sat dark. Every house except one, and the soft amber glow spilling from that porch hit him somewhere behind the sternum in a way he wasn't prepared for. He didn't know whose house it was. He didn't know whose light it was. He only knew that it was on, and somehow that was enough to make him finally turn off the engine. If this story already has you feeling something, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The drive from Portland had taken 11 hours. Logan had planned for 8, maybe 9 if Chloe needed more bathroom stops than usual. But somewhere around the Oregon-California border, she'd woken up from a dead sleep crying about a nightmare she couldn't fully describe. Something about water, something about being left. And he'd pulled off at a rest stop and sat with her in the back seat for 40 minutes, her head against his shoulder, his hand drawing slow circles on her back the way her mother used to do. That had been the routine for almost 4 years now. Him doing things the way her mother used to do them, hoping the imitation was close enough. It wasn't. It never quite was. But Chloe seemed to accept it, which was the thing about children that still managed to undo him sometimes. Their capacity to accept imperfect substitutes without complaint, because they understood, on some wordless level, that the person offering the substitute was already giving everything they had. He'd gotten back on the highway at 11:15 at night. Chloe had fallen back asleep almost immediately, her mouth slightly open, one hand curled loosely around the strap of her seatbelt the way she always slept in the car. Logan had driven the remaining 4 hours with the radio off, the windows cracked 2 inches, and nothing for company except the white noise of the highway and the particular kind of silence that lives inside a person who has been alone for a very long time. Clover Hill, California, population 4,200. The kind of town that barely registered on a map application. Just a small labeled dot between 2 larger ones, easy to scroll past if you didn't know to look for it. Logan had grown up here, learned to ride a bike on Sycamore Street, caught fireflies in the lot behind the post office, broken his left wrist falling out of the oak tree in his parents' backyard when he was 9. He had left at 18 with a scholarship to UC Davis and the absolute conviction that he would never come back except for Christmas. Life had a way of restructuring those convictions. His father had gone first, a stroke in February, quiet and sudden. The kind of death that gave no warning and asked no permission. His mother had followed 11 months later, and the doctors had called it heart failure. But Logan had privately believed it was something else, something less clinical. The specific failure that happens when the person you have lived beside for 40 years simply isn't there anymore, and your body forgets what it's supposed to do next. He'd inherited the house. A 3-bedroom craftsman with a porch that needed repainting and a kitchen his mother had kept spotless for 3 decades. He'd also inherited a modest amount of savings, enough to keep things stable for 6 months if he was careful, and the knowledge that his Portland lease was up in 30 days and his job at Harwick Engineering had ended 5 weeks earlier when the company restructured and eliminated his entire department with a form letter and 2 weeks severance. So, Clover Hill. He told himself it was a practical decision. The house was paid off. The cost of living was low. There was a decent elementary school 3 blocks from Sycamore Street where Chloe could start 2nd grade in September. He had remote consulting work that was inconsistent but real, enough to cover groceries and utilities if he picked up the freelance contracts he'd been putting off pursuing. All of that was true. All of that was logical. What was also true, and what he hadn't admitted out loud to anyone, including himself, was that he was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The other kind. The kind that accumulates over years of holding things together by yourself, of being both the strong one and the only one, of waking up every morning and making the conscious decision to keep going. Not because you necessarily want to, but because there is a 6-year-old down the hall whose breakfast isn't going to make itself. He was 32 years old, and he was exhausted in a way that felt much older. The town looked different at 2 in the morning. smaller somehow than he remembered it. The gas station on Route 9 had changed ownership twice based on the signage. The diner where he'd eaten Saturday breakfast with his father was still there, but dark, closed, a paper sign in the window that said, "Be back soon," in handwriting that looked like it had been there for months. The oak trees lining Sycamore Street were larger than he remembered. Thick-trunked now, their branches meeting overhead in the dark to form a kind of tunnel. He almost missed the house. He knew the address by memory. 14 Sycamore. But in the dark, with the street as quiet as a held breath, all the houses looked alike. Dark windows, dark porches, curtains drawn. The particular specific darkness of a neighborhood where everyone had gone to bed at a reasonable hour, because tomorrow was a work day, and there was nothing especially remarkable about this Tuesday night in July. Except for the house at the end of the block, number 22 Sycamore. The porch light was on. Not the harsh white blue of a security light. Something warmer than that, an older fixture, the kind with a slight amber cast, the kind that made you think of kitchens and people who cook things from scratch. It spilled across the porch steps in a soft pool and reached just far enough to catch the edge of the flower bed running along the front of the house. Petunias maybe, or something similar, purple dark in the warm light. Logan sat in the car with the engine off and looked at it for longer than was probably reasonable. He didn't know who lived at number 22. His parents' neighbor on the left had been the Delgado family, a retired couple who kept a vegetable garden and waved from their porch every morning. On the right, a widower named Frank Purcell, who repaired small appliances out of his garage. Neither of those had been number 22. Number 22 had been the Hathaways, he thought, though the name surfaced from a distance so deep it barely felt real, the way childhood memories do when enough years have gone between. It didn't matter who it was. What mattered was that the light was on, and it was the only light on the entire street, and he was sitting in the dark at 2 a.m. with his daughter asleep in the back seat and an empty house waiting for him and a kind of loneliness that had stopped having a bottom. He got out of the car slowly, quietly, not wanting to wake Chloe. The night air was warm and carried the smell of dry grass and something faintly floral, jasmine maybe from somewhere nearby. He stood between his car and the front gate of his parents' house and just breathed for a moment. The porch light at number 22 didn't flicker, didn't dim, just stayed on, steady and unremarkable, the way lights do when they've been left on by someone who intended to leave them on. He went to get Chloe. She was heavier than she looked, the way sleeping children always are, boneless and completely surrendered to unconsciousness. Her backpack still strapped to her back because she'd refused to take it off at the rest stop, and he hadn't pushed it. He carried her up the front walk with one arm under her knees and one behind her back, her head against his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. The key his mother's attorney had mailed him 3 weeks ago worked on the first try. The house smelled like his mother's cleaning products and something older underneath. The particular smell of a place that has been lived in for decades and doesn't entirely release its history even when it's empty. He didn't turn on any lights, just carried Chloe through the hallway by memory, found the stairs, found the room that had been his as a teenager and would now be hers, laid her down on the bare mattress still in her clothes, took off her shoes, pulled the single blanket from the box he'd packed for first-night emergencies. She didn't wake up. She never woke up once. A good sleep had taken hold. He stood in the doorway of the room for a moment, looking at her. The streetlight came through the window at an angle that caught her face. The slope of her nose, the slight frown she always wore while sleeping, as if even in dreams she was working something out. She looked so much like her mother sometimes that it still had the capacity to stop his breathing for a second. He went back downstairs. He sat on the front porch steps because the house felt too still and too full of his parents' absence at the same time. The night was genuinely quiet. Not the suppressed quiet of Portland where you always knew the city noise was there, just temporarily out of earshot, but the deep, genuine quiet of a small town at 2 a.m. where the nearest highway was 6 miles away. He could see the light from number 22 from where he sat. It wasn't particularly visible at this distance, just a warm smudge at the end of the block, but it was there. He looked at it for a while. Then he went inside and found a corner of the living room floor that wasn't too close to any boxes and lay down with his jacket folded under his head and his eyes open on the ceiling. He didn't sleep for a long time. The first week was about practicalities. There were utility accounts to set up and an internet connection to arrange and boxes to unpack in a specific order. Chloe's room first, then the kitchen, then whatever remained. There was a grocery run on the second morning because the previous owners had left nothing edible except 3 cans of diced tomatoes and a box of pasta that had expired 14 months ago. There was a visit to the elementary school to arrange Chloe's enrollment, a conversation with the school secretary who was professionally kind in the specific way of people who have these conversations dozens of times each year. Chloe handled the transition the way she handled most things, with a combination of genuine openness and sharp-eyed observation that Logan had long since stopped finding surprising. She was 6, but she missed nothing. She cataloged the house methodically in the first 2 days, opening every door, investigating every corner, asking questions with the straightforward relentlessness of a child who has learned that the world operates on information and the best strategy is to acquire as much of it as possible. "Why is there a cat door if there's no cat?" she asked, pointing to the small panel at the base of the back door. "Grandma had a cat. A long time ago, before you were born. What happened to it?" "It got old." Chloe considered this with her characteristic brief gravity. "We should get a cat." "We'll see." "That means no." "That means we'll see." She gave him a look that was so precisely the expression her mother used to make, slightly skeptical, not yet convinced, that he had to turn toward the sink and pretend to be very interested in the faucet for a moment. "Can I go outside?" she asked. "In the backyard." "What about the front?" "After I check the neighborhood." She accepted this without argument, which meant she understood the subtext. Chloe was good at understanding subtext, better than most adults in his experience, and it was both one of the things he loved most about her and one of the things that made him feel the most guilty. The sense that she had developed that skill at least partially in response to having to navigate around his harder days, and that no child should have to become fluent in the silent language of a parent's pain before she'd lost her first tooth. She'd lost 4 teeth. He had kept them all in a small wooden box that had originally held his mother's sewing needles. On the 3rd morning, he took her to the front yard. It was early, just past 7, and the street was beginning to wake up. 2 houses down, a man in work clothes was loading tools into a truck. Across the street, someone had left sprinklers running on a timer, and they moved in slow arcs across a lawn that was green despite the July heat. The air was already warm, carrying the smell of cut grass and dry earth, and the particular quality of small-town morning light that seems less hurried than city light, as if even the sun takes its time here. Chloe stood on the front steps and surveyed the street with her hands on her hips. "It's quiet," she said. "Yeah, I like it." "You do?" She nodded. "In Portland, the neighbor's dog barked all the time. Chester. Chester." She said the name with faint disapproval. Chester had issues. Logan almost smiled. "Where did you hear that expression?" "You said it, about Chester, on the phone to Mrs. Alvarez." He had, in fact, said exactly that. On the phone to his neighbor, complaining about the golden retriever next door that screamed every morning at 6. "I didn't know you were listening." "I'm always listening," Chloe said, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting an obvious fact. "You know the house at the end?" He followed her gaze. Number 22 sat at the far end of the block, quiet in the morning light. In daylight, it looked different than it had at 2 in the morning. A well-maintained colonial, white with dark green shutters, a flower bed running along the front that was indeed petunias, neat and deliberately planted. The porch fixture that had been glowing on his first night looked ordinary now, switched off in the daylight. "What about it?" he said. "Someone waters their flowers very early, before we came outside." He looked at her. "How do you know that?" "The soil is wet, see? It's darker than the neighbor's." She pointed at the house next door to number 22. "And the sidewalk has drips on it, like from a watering can. I saw when we went to the grocery store." Logan looked. She was right. The concrete in front of number 22 had dried watermarks, irregular spots, exactly the kind left by an overenthusiastic watering can. "You're going to be either a detective or a menace," he said. Chloe seemed to find both options acceptable. He met her on a Thursday. He'd been trying to fix the back gate, which had been sticking since they arrived and had developed an alarming lean to the right that suggested the post was not as structurally committed as a gate post ought to be. He'd borrowed a post hole digger from the hardware store, technically purchased, though the proprietor had said he could return it if he didn't need it longer than a week, and was in the process of discovering that the soil under the gate post was not cooperating. Chloe was in the backyard with the bubble machine he'd bought at the drugstore, engaged in the extremely serious project of seeing how many bubbles she could get to float over the fence into the neighbor's yard. "I got 17, she called to him. "Great. Now I'm trying for 25. Ambitious." He was kneeling in the dirt, trying to determine exactly how rotten the base of the post was, when a voice came from the other side of the fence, not the back fence, the side fence between number 14 and number 22. "Your bubble count is off. I counted 23. He stood up fast enough that his knee made an embarrassing sound and turned to find a woman standing on the other side of the white fence that divided the 2 yards. She was leaning on it with her forearms on the top rail, looking at Chloe with an expression that was genuinely amused rather than the performed amusement of an adult humoring a child. His first impression? She was around his age. Dark hair pulled back with the kind of casualness that comes from actually not caring, rather than arranging to look like you don't care. She was wearing what looked like running clothes, leggings, a loose gray shirt, hair not yet dry from what might have been a recent shower. No makeup, or at least none that was doing any obvious work. She looked like someone who had just gotten home from something, or was about to leave for something, not like someone who had staged herself at the fence. His second impression? She was looking at Chloe the way people look at kids when they actually like kids, not when they're managing them. 23? Chloe said, deeply interested. "From over there?" "I was on my porch. The angle is better for counting from up there." She jerked her chin toward number 22. "You should try blowing them into the wind instead of against it. You'll get more lift." "Against the wind is a challenge," Chloe said, with the gravity of someone who has thought this through. "Fair enough." The woman glanced at Logan then, as if she'd been deliberately waiting to acknowledge him until Chloe was done with her point. "I'm Vivian. I live next door." "Logan." He crossed the yard, pulling off his work glove to shake her hand. "My parents were the Mercers. This was their house." Something shifted in her expression. Not pity exactly, but recognition. "I heard about your father, and then your mother." She didn't add anything to that. Didn't follow it with sorry for your loss in the automatic way of someone completing a social obligation. Just said it plainly, the way you acknowledge a real thing. "Yeah," he said. "I didn't know them well. I've only been in Clover Hill 2 years, but your mother used to bring tomatoes from her garden in the summer. She just left them on the porch with a note." "That sounds right." Chloe appeared at his elbow. "I'm Chloe." "I know," Vivian said. "You mentioned it when you were counting bubbles." Chloe frowned. "I didn't say my name." "You said, 'Watch this, Chloe's about to break a record,' talking to yourself." A pause, then Chloe's expression broke into a grin that showed the gap where her left incisor used to be. "I was giving myself encouragement." "Solid strategy," Vivian said. "Does it work?" "Sometimes." Chloe looked at Logan. "Can we give her some of the tomatoes?" He blinked. "We don't have tomatoes." "Grandma's garden, in the back. There are tomatoes." He hadn't even registered that his mother's garden was still producing. He'd walked past it twice without really looking. "I don't know if those are still good." "They're good," Chloe said, with the confidence of someone who had conducted an investigation. "I checked this morning. There are 6 big ones and some little ones." Logan looked at Vivian. "Apparently we have tomatoes." Vivian smiled, a real one, not the managed smile of a person being polite. "I won't say no to a tomato." Pachak. She brought lemonade. He didn't ask for it and didn't expect it. 40 minutes after their conversation at the fence, while he was still wrestling with the gate post, Chloe came running from the direction of the front yard to announce that the neighbor was at the front door with a pitcher. "I let her in," Chloe said. Chloe, you can't just let people in." "She's not a stranger. She told us her name." "That's not—" He stopped. "We're going to talk about stranger safety." "She has lemonade, real lemonade, with the lemons on the outside of the pitcher." Chloe was already heading back into the house. Come on. Vivian was standing in his kitchen with the apologetic posture of someone who knows they've made a slight miscalculation. I should have knocked at the back gate instead. I didn't mean to. Your daughter has a very persuasive manner. She's been told. He took off his other work glove. You didn't have to do that. I had a picture I'd already made. It seemed... She glanced at the unpacked boxes on the counter, the bare walls, the general atmosphere of a house mid-transition. It seemed like the kind of thing. He didn't have a good argument for that, so he got glasses from the box he'd labeled Kitchen, Priority 1. And they sat at the table that had been his parents' table and was now his table. And Chloe sat across from them and drank 2 glasses in rapid succession while Vivian asked her questions about the Bubble Project with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested in the answers. He noticed over the next hour several things. She never asked him anything difficult. Not why he'd moved back, not what his work was, not whether he was managing. She asked Chloe about her favorite book and got a 15-minute answer involving a series about a girl detective and followed up with intelligent questions about specific plot points. She asked Logan if the gatepost had surrendered yet, and when he said not entirely, she mentioned without making it a big thing that her brother had a concrete mixer he'd left in her garage last spring that he'd never come back for, if that would help. When the lemonade was gone, she stood up and took her picture without prompting and said it was nice to meet them both. She told Chloe the bubble strategy tip was a standing offer, available for testing whenever she was ready. She told Logan she hoped the gatepost lost. Then she was gone, and the house felt exactly the same dimensions it had before she'd arrived, but the air in it was somehow slightly different, less heavy. He couldn't have said why. I like her, Chloe announced. You like everyone. No, I don't. Chloe was entirely matter-of-fact about this. I didn't like Mrs. Garrison. Mrs. Garrison had been Chloe's kindergarten teacher, a well-meaning woman who had, in Chloe's assessment, an unfortunate habit of using a baby voice when speaking to children, which Chloe found insulting. This was a fair point. Logan had agreed with it privately, while maintaining professionally that Mrs. Garrison was lovely. Fair enough, he said. Vivian talks to me like I'm a person, Chloe said. You are a person. Some grown-ups forget. She slid off her chair and took her glass to the sink, an unprompted act of responsibility that Logan took as evidence that the move hadn't entirely disrupted her routines. Can I go water Grandma's tomatoes? Yeah. Don't eat them off the vine. She was already out the back door. He sat for a moment at the table that had been his parents' table, with the empty glasses in front of him and the afternoon light coming through the window at the same angle it had always come through that window. And something in his chest did something uncomfortable that he wasn't ready to name yet. The first difficult night came in the second week. He'd been expecting it. They always came. The nights that were harder than the others, that arrived without warning in the middle of an ordinary week when things had seemed, briefly, to be going adequately. He'd learned to recognize the early signs, the specific quality of restlessness at around 7 in the evening, the way his thoughts started pulling toward the past like something with a current, the low-grade physical tension across his shoulders and jaw that wasn't quite anxiety and wasn't quite pain, but lived in the neighborhood of both. He'd put Chloe to bed and come back downstairs to find that the ordinary quiet of the house had shifted into the other kind, the kind with weight to it. He went out onto the porch. He did this sometimes, just sat in the open air and let whatever was moving through him move, rather than sitting with it in a closed room. The air was warm and the street was quiet, and the fireflies were doing their slow, intermittent work in the darkness of the yard. The light was on at number 22. He'd noticed it every night since he'd arrived, not prominently, just at the edge of awareness, the way you notice a regular feature of a landscape. Every evening, when full dark came, the amber porch light at the end of the block came on. Every morning, by the time he and Chloe were up, it was off. He didn't know Vivian Ashcroft well enough yet to ask about it, but something about its regularity had started to feel, not comforting exactly, because that was too large a word for something so small, but steady, consistent. In a life that had not been particularly rich in consistent things for several years, there was something in the simple predictability of it. He sat on the porch steps for an hour and a half. The thoughts came and he let them come. His mother's hands folding laundry, the particular quality of his father's silence, The specific way a hospital corridor sounds at 3 in the morning, his wife's voice in those final weeks when speaking had become effortful, and she'd conserved it, chosen her words with a care she hadn't needed to use before. Chloe at 2 years old, not yet knowing what was happening. Chloe at 3, beginning to understand that something had happened, asking questions that Logan had answered with the truth in age-appropriate increments, as he'd promised himself he would. The grief was not fresh. It hadn't been fresh for a long time. It had become something else, a standing feature of his interior landscape, like the scar on his left wrist from the fallout of the oak tree, present and unremarkable most of the time, occasionally catching on something and reminding him it was there. What was present tonight was less grief and more the particular exhaustion of having held things together alone for so long. The specific weight of that. He was still sitting there when the front door of number 22 opened. Vivian came out with a mug in both hands and sat on her own porch steps, and for a moment neither of them acknowledged the other. Just two people at opposite ends of a quiet street sitting in the warm summer dark. Then she called down, "Can't sleep either?" "Not trying to yet," he called back. A pause. Then, "I'm going to water the garden in the morning if Chloe wants to help." He understood that this was not really about the garden. "She'd like that," he said. Another pause. "Good night, Logan." "Good night." She went inside. The porch light stayed on. He sat there for another 30 minutes, and by the time he went in, whatever had been pressing against his chest had loosened enough that sleep was at least a reasonable aspiration. By the end of the first month, something had been established between them that didn't have a clear name. Not friendship exactly, though it was in that direction. More like the beginning of a mutual ease. The particular quality of comfort that develops between two people who have, without discussing it, made the decision to be honest rather than performative with each other. Vivian worked. She worked a lot. Logan had learned this gradually and almost incidentally. She left early most mornings in clothes that had the contained authority of someone going somewhere serious, and came home late, and the lights in the front room of number 22 were often on past midnight. She had mentioned, in the sideways manner of someone who doesn't lead with their professional identity, that she ran a company in the city. He hadn't asked more than that, and she hadn't offered more, and the absence of elaboration had felt like a kind of mutual respect. What she did with her off hours was invest them in very ordinary things with a kind of complete attention that he found slightly disarming. She gardened with genuine investment. She cooked, real cooking, the kind that involved multiple pots and deliberate preparation and the occasional muffled profanity when something didn't go right. She read on her porch in the evenings before the light went too dim, physical books, dog-eared and clearly reread. Chloe had adopted her with the casual confidence of a child who has identified a reliable adult and seen no reason not to incorporate her into the established world order. "Vivian says morning is the best time to water because less evaporation," Chloe reported at breakfast one Friday. "That's right. She also says you have to talk to plants." "Do you?" "She does. She talks to the tomatoes." "What does she say to them?" Chloe considered this with suitable gravity. "She asks them how they're doing. And then she checks if they look okay, and if they do, she says, 'Good work.'" A pause. "I told her I talked to my stuffed animals, and she said it's basically the same principle." "It probably is," Logan said. "She's pretty smart." He looked at his coffee. "Yeah, she seems like she might be." Chloe was watching him with the focused, lateral attention of a child who has learned not to ask direct questions when indirect observation yields better data. He knew that look. He'd seen it often enough to recognize what it meant. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said, with the studied neutrality of someone who means something. "Chloe." "I said nothing." She ate a spoonful of cereal with elaborate innocence. "She said we could come over for dinner on Saturday if you want." He was quiet for a moment. "When did she say that?" "Yesterday, when I helped with the tomatoes. And you're telling me on Friday." "I didn't want you to have time to think about a reason not to go." He looked at his daughter for a long moment. "You are 6 years old." "Almost 7?" "Almost 7, and you are already outmaneuvering me." Chloe smiled, the gap-toothed smile that was, in his private opinion, the most honest and disarming thing he had ever encountered. "Is that a yes?" He sighed. "I'll text her." Well sent. Saturday dinner was not what he'd expected. He'd been preparing himself for something that required sustained social performance, a careful dinner party atmosphere where he'd have to manage his presentation while simultaneously making sure Chloe behaved. He'd been preparing since early afternoon, working himself into a low-grade tension that he recognized as disproportionate and couldn't entirely talk himself out of. What he found when he knocked on the door of number 22 at 6 o'clock was a kitchen that smelled of roasted garlic and slightly burned edges, and someone who had clearly been cooking for a while and had not entirely controlled the process. Vivian was at the stove with a dish towel over one shoulder, the back door open to let out steam, and the expression of someone who is managing a situation. "I had a whole plan," she said, by way of greeting. "The plan had a different timeline." "Do you need help?" "I need someone to watch the risotto." He helped with the risotto. Chloe, who had been given a very specific job involving tearing lettuce, conducted that operation at the kitchen table with the focus of someone for whom the task was genuinely interesting. They ate at the kitchen table rather than the dining room because, as Vivian explained, the dining room table had become storage for a project she hadn't finished yet, which turned out to be an elaborate jigsaw puzzle that was about 60% complete and covered the entire surface. "It's a map of the world," Chloe noted, examining it on the way past. "I do them when I can't sleep," Vivian said. "Us too," Chloe said. "Except we do reading. Also a solid strategy." She put dinner on the table. "Chloe, have you ever had risotto?" "Once. It was wrong." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean, wrong?" "Too thick, like cement." "I'm choosing not to be offended by that as a comparison to tonight's offering." She set the bowl down. "Tell me what you think." Chloe ate a spoonful with the critical attention of someone conducting an evaluation. A pause. "This is right." Vivian looked at Logan. He managed, barely, not to laugh. Dinner was not elegant. The risotto was good but slightly oversalted, and the salad dressing had been made without measuring and was aggressively vinegary. And at one point, Chloe knocked over her water glass with the philosophical detachment of a person who is not particularly surprised by this development, and they had to spend 5 minutes dealing with that. Vivian had made dessert, a fruit crumble that she'd gotten out of the oven 8 minutes late and had a darker crust than intended. "Artisanal," she said when she set it on the table. "That's a fancy word for burnt," Chloe said. "Chloe," Logan started. "It's fine," Vivian said, and she was genuinely laughing. "She's not wrong. Eat the inside parts." The inside parts were excellent. He hadn't laughed at a dinner table in a long time, not genuinely. He'd done the performance of it. The polite response laugh at social occasions, the managed chuckle at appropriate moments. But this was different. This was actual laughter, the involuntary kind, at something genuinely funny, and it arrived without warning and lasted longer than he expected. He noticed the moment it happened. Noticed because Chloe noticed it. The brief, satisfied flicker in her expression that she quickly suppressed, the particular way she redirected her attention to her crumble with the studied nonchalance of a person trying not to appear to have noticed something important. He almost said something, decided not to. On the walk back to number 14 at 8:30, with Chloe half asleep on his back and the evening air warm and sweet with whatever Vivian had planted along her front path, he felt something that was different from the weight he'd been carrying, not its absence. He wasn't naive about the permanence of what had accumulated in him over the years, but something alongside it, a different kind of weight, lighter, less settled, something that sat in his chest in a way that was not the familiar ache of solitude, but something with a different shape entirely. He tucked Chloe in and went to his room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while. Through the window, at the end of the block, the porch light at number 22 was on. It had always been on. Every night since he'd arrived in this town with $37 and a sleeping child and nothing that felt like a future. He'd been so tired for so long that he'd stopped expecting things to feel different, stopped expecting to sit at a table and laugh without having to work at it, stopped expecting the darkness to feel navigable rather than total. He lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling. The house was quiet. The street was quiet. The light at the end of the block burned on in the summer dark, and somewhere in the middle of those ordinary things, in the plain, unremarkable silence of a Tuesday night in July, in a small town he'd spent his whole adult life running from, Logan Mercer closed his eyes and, for the first time since he'd come back, fell asleep without trying. August arrived the way summer does in small California towns, not with any dramatic announcement, just a gradual thickening of heat that settled over Clover Hill like something that had always been there and wasn't planning to leave. The mornings were still bearable if you got outside before 8. After that, the air had a weight to it, and the smart move was shade and cold water and the kind of patience that hot weather teaches whether you want to learn it or not. Logan had settled into something that resembled a routine, though he would not have used that word for it because it still felt provisional. A temporary arrangement that might dissolve if he looked at it too directly. He was up before 6 most mornings, which was less about discipline and more about the way his mind operated, the particular wiring that had never allowed him to sleep past the first light, even on the days when sleep had been hard-won and he'd only gotten 4 hours of it. He made coffee and sat on the back porch and went through his email while the yard was still in shade, and that hour, the quiet one before Chloe woke, before the day had made any demands yet, was the one he protected most. The consulting work had steadied out over the month. 2 ongoing clients, both small engineering firms needing structural review work that he could do remotely, and a third project that had come in through a former colleague, a commercial building assessment that paid reasonably well and would carry him through September without touching the savings. It wasn't the career he'd had before everything changed, but it was real work, and it was his, and it was enough, and after a year of things being not enough, enough felt like something to hold on to. Chloe started school in the second week of August. The elementary school was 3 blocks away, close enough that he walked her every morning and every afternoon stood at the gate waiting, which she had already begun to find slightly embarrassing but hadn't said so directly yet. She just walked out with a specific studied neutrality, neither ignoring him nor making a point of his presence. On the 3rd day, she walked out holding the hand of a girl with red braids who was apparently named Juniper and who talked at the speed of someone for whom silence was a waste of available bandwidth. Chloe introduced him with a formality that suggested she'd been rehearsing. "This is my dad. He's an engineer. He figures out why buildings don't fall down." "My dad drives a truck," Juniper said. "That's also important," Logan said. "I know," said Juniper, entirely confident in this assessment, and the 2 girls went back to a conversation that had been interrupted by the formality and resumed now as if he had ceased to exist. He walked home behind them feeling something that was not quite happiness but was in the vicinity. A cautious warmth, provisional and careful, like the first reliable week of good weather after a long winter. What he hadn't figured out yet, and what the routine didn't address, was what to do with the evenings. During the day there was structure, work, the school run, the small maintenance tasks the house required, grocery runs, the ongoing project of unpacking boxes that he was completing at a pace that suggested a man who was not entirely committed to the idea of permanence. The evenings were different. After Chloe went to bed, the hours opened up in a way that he didn't always know how to fill. And the quiet of the house, which in the daytime felt settled and okay, acquired at night a different quality, the kind of quiet that amplifies whatever you carry inside it. He developed a habit, without exactly deciding to, of ending up on the front porch at some point in the evening. Sometimes with a book he wasn't fully concentrating on. Sometimes with nothing, just the warm air and the sound of the neighborhood doing its quiet nighttime things. And sometimes, without planning it, Vivian would be on her own porch, and they'd end up talking across the distance between their houses in the casual, unhurried way of people who have nowhere else to be. These conversations had a particular quality that he couldn't quite categorize. They were easy, which was not nothing. He'd forgotten what easy felt like, conversationally. He'd spent so much of the past several years managing what he revealed and what he didn't, calibrating every social interaction with the careful attention of someone who has learned that too much honesty has a cost, that people become uncomfortable with grief that has gone on longer than feels socially appropriate, that the polite and acceptable answer to "how are you" is always fine or getting there, never the real one. With Vivian, he still didn't say the real thing, but he also didn't feel the effort of not saying it. The space she created, and it was deliberate, he understood that. The way she never pushed, never asked questions that would require him to either lie or go somewhere difficult. That space had a quality of rest to it that he hadn't known he needed until it was there. One evening in the 3rd week of August, she came over the fence with a container of leftover pasta and a bottle of olive oil she said she'd bought 2 of by mistake and didn't need both. He accepted these with the sense that the offerings were a form of language, a way of doing something without having to say the thing that motivated it. "You don't have to keep feeding me," he said. "I'm not feeding you," she said. "I'm redistributing surplus. There's a difference." "Is there?" "I have a whole philosophy about it." She leaned on the fence. She was in work clothes, but the jacket was gone. The sleeves of her shirt rolled up. She'd been at the office. He'd seen the car leave at 7 in the morning. It was past 7 in the evening now. "How was Chloe's day?" "Good. She and Juniper are apparently building an ant farm out of a shoebox." "Is that going to work?" "No. But she'll learn something from it. She'll learn that ants have opinions about their housing, and those opinions are expressed through escape." Vivian smiled. "How's the building assessment going?" He told her about the contract last week, in the same peripheral way she'd mentioned her company. Not a discussion of it, just a passing reference that indicated it existed. "I submitted the first section yesterday. Client came back with 17 questions." "Is that a lot?" "For a first section, yes. But they're good questions." He paused. "They're actually thinking about it, which is not always true. Nothing worse than a client who doesn't read what you sent them. You know that experience." "I know it extremely well." She said it with the wry brevity of someone gesturing at a large topic rather than opening it. He'd learned by now not to pull on those threads. She'd tell him what she wanted to tell him, and he wouldn't push, and she seemed to operate on the same principle with him. It was a fair arrangement. Two people with histories, keeping company without demanding the histories. "I should let you get back to it," she said. "I wasn't doing anything." "Then I shouldn't interrupt your not doing anything." "You're not interrupting it." He heard himself say it and recognized the quality of it, the slight surprise of meaning something he hadn't planned to say. It's good, having someone to talk to. Out here." She looked at him for a moment, not with anything loaded, just with the direct attention she gave most things. "Yeah," she said. "For me too." She went back to her side of the fence. The porch light came on at number 22 as the last of the daylight gave out, steady and amber, doing its quiet nightly work. Inside the house, Logan ate her pasta standing at the kitchen counter. It was better than anything he'd made in the past month. He didn't say that. He figured she probably knew. The following Saturday changed the temperature of things between them, though not dramatically. More the way a conversation shifts when something true gets said that had previously been circling the periphery without landing. Chloe was at her first playdate at Juniper's house, dropped off at 9 with a backpack containing a juice box, 3 books, because, as she'd explained, she didn't know yet how much time Juniper spent reading, and the stuffed rabbit she went nowhere without, and which she would deny, if asked, was for comfort. He'd come home from the drop-off to find the house empty, and the morning already warm in the particular silence of a place that is usually occupied by a child, and currently isn't. He'd made a second cup of coffee and had sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and done approximately 40 minutes of work before accepting that his concentration was not available today. He'd been standing at the back fence doing not very much when Vivian's back door opened. "She at the play date?" she asked. "First one." "How are you handling it?" "Fine." She looked at him with the same mild directness she always had. "You look like a man standing at a fence doing not very much." "I'm inspecting the post." "The post you fixed 3 weeks ago. Checking my work." She pushed her door open wider. "Come have coffee. I have a thing I'm trying to figure out, and I want an engineer's perspective." The thing turned out to be a structural question about her back deck, which had developed a soft spot near the far railing that she'd been intermittently worried about and hadn't gotten around to having looked at. He got down on one knee and pressed at the boards and found the problem quickly enough. 2 planks with the beginning of wood rot, the kind that was common in older decks and wasn't an emergency yet, but wasn't something to ignore either. "You need these 2 replaced," he said, "and you should check the joists underneath. If the boards are going, there's a chance the moisture got to the framing." "How bad is that if it did?" "Depends on the extent. Probably not bad. This is the Pacific Coast. This kind of thing is common. A weekend job for someone who knows what they're doing." "Do you know what you're doing?" He looked up. "I'm a structural engineer." "I know. I'm asking if you'd be willing to look at the framing. I'll pay you." "You don't need to pay me. It's a deck." You keep refusing things I offer, she said. You keep offering things. It's how I'm built. She was leaning on the back railing on the safe end of the deck, arms crossed, looking at him in the straightforward way she had. Logan, I want to pay you for your time. You're a professional. Let me be a client. There was something in the phrasing that made it easier than charity. I'll look at the framing, he said, and we'll call it a consult. Fine, I'll call it a consult, and I'll put coffee and lunch on top of it. Deal. The framing was in better shape than the boards. Some surface discoloration, but nothing structurally compromised. He was under the deck with a flashlight for 40 minutes, calling out observations while she crouched at the edge, writing notes on her phone with the focused attention she brought to everything. When he came back out with dirt on both knees and his shirt, she handed him a bottle of water without comment. You're going to need to replace those 2 planks, he said. Framing is okay. I'd do it before the rainy season. Can I hire you to do it? I'm not a contractor. You could supervise a contractor. You don't need supervision. Any deck contractor can do this with the information I just gave you. She looked at him for a moment. You're not great at letting people need you, she said. He wasn't sure what to do with that. What do you mean? You're good at solving the problem and then making sure no one owes you anything for it. She said it without accusation, just observation. I noticed. He looked at the deck rather than at her. Old habit. Of what? He thought about how to say it without it becoming a larger conversation than he was prepared for. Not wanting to be someone else's burden, I guess. She was quiet for a moment. There's a difference between being a burden and letting someone return something. I know that. Do you? He looked at her then, and she was looking back at him with a steadiness that didn't waver or look away. The same steadiness she'd had that first conversation at the fence, the quality he'd been trying to identify all these weeks. It wasn't pity. It wasn't the careful management of someone navigating a fragile situation. It was just directness, just seeing him clearly and not being unsettled by what she saw. I'm working on it, he said. Fair enough, she said. And that was all. She made lunch. Sandwiches, real ones, with good bread, and the tomatoes from his mother's garden that she'd been receiving for a month now. They ate at the porch table on the deck that needed 2 new boards, and the conversation moved to easier ground. The contractor question, then town logistics, then Chloe's ant farm situation, which had evolved since last report. The ants had begun breaching the north wall of the shoebox, and Chloe had proposed reinforcing the perimeter with electrical tape, which Logan had approved on the grounds that the experiment should at least run its full course before failing. She's really something, Vivian said. She is. She gets it from somewhere. He was quiet for a second. She's a lot like her mother. He hadn't said her mother out loud to Vivian yet, hadn't gone near that territory. He said it now and it landed cleanly, without excessive weight, the way you can say a difficult thing when the air around you is right. Vivian didn't react to it with the specific overcareful response most people had, the lowered voice, the sudden gravitational increase around the topic. She just said, "What was she like?" "Practical," he said, very direct. She would have had 17 opinions about the ant farm. He paused. She was better at all of this than I am. The parenting stuff, the being present in a room with people and not working too hard at it. You don't work that hard at it. Today I don't. Then today counts. He looked at the table. She died when Chloe was 2, almost 4 years. That's a long time to do it alone. Yeah. He picked up his water glass. It is. The conversation didn't linger there. It moved, the way good conversations do, forward and sideways, leaving the hard thing said but not dwelling on it past what was useful. By the time he left to pick up Chloe at 2, something had shifted between them in a way that was difficult to articulate, but that he felt clearly. Some wall that hadn't been a wall exactly, more like a maintained distance, had moved. Not gone, just relocated. Chloe came out of Juniper's house with a drawing she'd made, a house with 2 windows and a garden, presented to Logan with the offhand manner of someone who is not making a big deal of a gift and expects the recipient to understand this. "What's this?" he asked. "Our house." She pointed. "That's my window. That's yours. That's Grandma's garden." "What's this?" He pointed to a smaller structure next to the house. That's the fence. She pointed further. And that's Vivian's porch. She had drawn, at the edge of the paper, a small amber square. A porch light. Already on. He folded it carefully and put it in his back pocket and didn't say anything about it, because Chloe would find sentiment embarrassing, and also because he wasn't sure, at that moment, that he had reliable control of his voice. They walked home in the afternoon heat, and she told him about Juniper's trampoline and a dispute she'd had about the rules of a game he'd never heard of, and a dog named Biscuit who had eaten an entire plate of crackers off the coffee table while Juniper's mother was answering the door. "How'd Biscuit feel about it?" he asked. "Great," Chloe said. "No regrets at all." He laughed. She grinned. They walked the last block in comfortable silence. That evening, around 9, his phone lit up with a message. He didn't recognize the number immediately. "Left some of the herb bread from dinner on your porch. Figured you'd be up late. V." He opened the front door. On the top step was a cloth bag with a round loaf inside it, still warm enough that the warmth came through the cloth when he picked it up. He stood there in the doorway for a moment with the warm bread in his hands and the summer dark around him and the porch light at the end of the block doing its steady, unremarkable thing. He went in and cut 2 thick slices and stood at the counter eating them without anything on them because they didn't need anything, and thought about what she'd said on the deck earlier. There's a difference between being a burden and letting someone return something, and how he'd said, "I know that," and she'd said, "Do you?" and he hadn't had a real answer for it then. He still didn't have one, but the question had settled in him in a way that felt different from the usual familiar weight, less like a judgment and more like something with room in it, an opening rather than a verdict. He texted back, "Bread is excellent, thank you." Then after a moment, "And I'm working on the other thing." 3 dots appeared, then, "I know, I can see." He put his phone face down on the counter and went back outside. The street was quiet. Fireflies moved in slow arcs over the Delgado yard. Somewhere down the block, a screen door opened and closed. The ordinary furniture of a summer night in a small town that had once felt like the place he'd escaped from, and was now, without him having decided it exactly, beginning to feel like the place he'd come back to. Not home yet. He wasn't ready to say that. But something in the neighborhood. He sat on the porch until the heat broke a little, which took until nearly 11, and by then he was tired in the good way. The way that comes from a day that had actually happened, that had weight and texture and real moments in it. And when he went in and went upstairs and lay down, the last thing he was aware of before sleep was the amber edge of light at the end of Sycamore Street, steady as always, burning on in the dark. September came in cooler than August, which was a relief. The heat had been wearing on everyone in the way that sustained heat does. Not dramatically, just gradually. A slow erosion of patience and energy that nobody talked about directly, but that showed up in small things. Shorter tempers at the grocery store, more cars parked in shade even if it meant walking further, a general collective agreement to slow down slightly and wait for the temperature to become reasonable again. The cooling felt like a permission. Chloe had settled into school with the efficiency of a child who understands that new environments require assessment before investment, and had now completed her assessment and made her investments accordingly. Juniper was the primary one, a friendship that operated at a high volume and a fast pace and seemed to involve a continuous collaborative project that changed form every few days. The ant farm had been succeeded by a leaf collection, which had been succeeded by a plan to write and illustrate a book about a dog who could do math, which was currently in the early drafting phase. Logan had met Juniper's parents at a school pickup in late August. A couple named Reed and Diane, easy and warm, the kind of people who immediately offer their home Wi-Fi password and tell you where to park when you come to pick up your kid. Diane had mentioned a neighborhood block party in October, still weeks away but apparently requiring early logistical investment, and had said she'd send details through the school app. He'd said sure and meant it, which surprised him slightly. 6 weeks ago, he would have said sure and found a reason to be unavailable. The consulting work had expanded. The third client had referred him to a fourth, and the building assessment had gone well enough that the firm had asked if he'd be interested in a retainer arrangement. Not full-time, 2 or 3 days a week of remote work, enough to make the financial picture genuinely stable for the first time since he'd been laid off. He'd said yes before they'd finished explaining the terms, then felt the specific sheepishness of someone who has revealed too much eagerness. He told Vivian about it over the fence on a Tuesday evening, not because he needed to tell anyone, but because she was there, and she'd known about the building assessment, and it seemed natural. "That's good," she said, and she said it the way she said most things, directly, without inflation. "That's really good, Logan. It's a start. It's more than a start." She was pulling dead blooms off the roses along her fence line, the kind of maintenance gardening that looked meditative when she did it. "What made them come back to you specifically?" "The report, I think. I went deeper than they expected. Because you're thorough. Because I wasn't doing anything else at the time." He said it as a deflection, and she recognized it as one. He could tell, but she let it pass. "Take the win," she said, "working on it." "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." She snipped a stem, held up the dead bloom, looked at it for a moment with the focused attention she gave most things. "Chloe said you went to the school thing last week." "Parent information night. Yeah." He leaned on the fence. It was... He searched for the right word. Normal. It was a normal thing, and I did it. Is that an achievement? He thought about how to explain this without it becoming heavier than the evening warranted. "I used to be good at that stuff. The social normal stuff. Before everything, I was actually pretty easy in a room full of people. And then for a few years, everything required so much effort that I stopped doing most of it. And then stopping became the default." He shrugged. "Going to a school thing at 7 in the evening sounds small, but it took more preparation than it should have." Vivian had stopped deadheading and was looking at him with the direct, unperformed attention she always gave when he said something real. "How'd it go, though?" "Fine." "Good, actually. One of the other dads knows a guy at an engineering firm in Sacramento. We talked for 20 minutes. He paused. "I stayed the whole hour." "That's not small," she said. "Don't call it small." He looked at her. She meant it. She wasn't being kind, she was being accurate, and he understood the difference by now. "Okay," he said. "Okay." She went back to the roses. "I have a thing Thursday evening, company dinner. I won't be back until late, probably." She said it the same way she said everything, matter-of-factly, not asking for anything. But he understood by now that she told him her schedule in these small sideways ways, and that this was part of their particular language. "I'll keep an eye on the house," he said. "You don't need to." "I know." He pushed off the fence. "But I will." She looked at him over her shoulder, one quick look, and went back to work. He went inside and made dinner and helped Chloe with a worksheet about addition that she found deeply beneath her abilities but completed with minimum complaint. And by the time the evening was done and Chloe was in bed and the house was quiet, he'd nearly forgotten about the conversation. Except that he noticed on Thursday night, when he went out to sit on the porch at 9:30, that the house at number 22 was dark except for a single interior light left on. She'd told him once, casually, that she always left the kitchen light on when she was out late, and that the porch light came on at exactly the same time it always did, on the timer she'd clearly set years ago and never changed. He sat with that for a while, the light staying on regardless of whether she was there to leave it on. There was something in that which he didn't examine too carefully. The explosion happened on a Friday. It was the last Friday in September, just past 9 in the evening, and it came without warning in the way that these things always do. Not building to anything, not preceded by any sense that the night was different from other nights. Chloe had gone to bed at 8. He was on the front porch with a book he wasn't fully reading, the evening cool enough for a jacket, the street doing its quiet end-of-week thing. He'd seen Vivian's car in the driveway since 6, which meant she was home and probably doing the things she did on Friday evenings, cooking something elaborate that she approached like a project, music playing from the kitchen. Once, a few weeks back, he'd been able to hear it faintly from his porch when both their windows were open, something with a piano in it, something he didn't recognize. He'd registered all of this the way you register familiar things, peripherally, without analysis, filed away in the background processing that runs continuously. Then the sound came. It was loud, a concussive, percussive boom from somewhere down the street. Not a gunshot, something larger than that, something that displaced air and rattled windows. His body knew what to do before his mind caught up. He was on his feet and against the wall of the house in under 2 seconds, his shoulder blades pressed to the siding, his right arm coming up automatically in the gesture of a man reaching for something that wasn't there anymore. His mind caught up about 3 seconds later. Transformer, some rational part of him supplied. Electrical transformer. They blow sometimes. It's a sound. It's only a sound. You are on a porch in Clover Hill, California. But the body doesn't negotiate with the rational mind when the body has its own information. And his body's information was 4 years old and encoded at a level that reasoning couldn't reach. The street was the street. The houses were the houses. The oak trees were standing in their usual positions, unmoved. Down the block, a porch light at another house had gone dark. There, the transformer, a utility pole 2 houses down. A small secondary fire visible at its base before it guttered and died. A car alarm somewhere had started up in response to the concussion and was doing its useless, agitated cycling. He knew all of this. He processed it, labeled it correctly, understood what it was. And he could not move from the wall. His hands were wrong. That was the first thing he was aware of. The specific wrongness of his hands, the way they'd gone distant and trembling. The tremor that was not cold-related and not fear-related in any present sense, but was something much older, something that lived beneath the present and had its own triggers and its own timeline. His breathing had gone shallow and fast, and the shallow, fast breathing was feeding the other thing, and he knew this, understood the loop, had learned the loop well enough to describe it in clinical language on the occasions he'd been required to. And knowing it did not break it. That was the thing. You could know every mechanism of it and watch yourself from a distance with perfect clarity and still be completely unable to do the simple thing of breathing normally and walking down the porch steps. He was aware of the street and also not on it. He was here and also somewhere else, somewhere with different smells and different sounds and a particular quality of light that he hadn't seen in 4 years and that his nervous system had apparently kept in storage with perfect fidelity, available for immediate recall at the slightest adequate provocation. He didn't hear the screen door at number 22 open. He didn't hear the footsteps on the porch. What he was aware of, at some indeterminate point, was a voice. Not calling out, not alarmed, just present. Speaking in the even, unhurried tone of someone reading from something comfortable. "The street looks okay," Vivian said. "It was the transformer on the Delgado end. I can see a utility company truck already coming down Route 9. They must have gotten an automatic alert." She wasn't speaking to him specifically. She was standing on her porch, looking at the street, reporting what she saw in the same tone she'd used to read him a weather update. Matter of fact, grounded. Something in his breathing began to change, fractionally, the kind of change you could only measure if you were paying very close attention. "Chloe's still inside?" she said. He managed, "Yes." "Okay." A pause. "The Delgado porch light is out. Mr. Delgado is going to be annoyed about that. He has a thing about his perimeter lighting." His back was still against the wall. She was still on her porch, not approaching, not making any move toward him. Just there, just talking about ordinary things in the same voice. "He's very particular about it," Logan said. His voice sounded strange to him, not quite his own. "Extremely. He came over twice last spring to ask if my porch light timer was on the right cycle. Very politely. But twice." Another pause. The car alarm stopped. It had. He hadn't noticed. "Take your time," she said, without changing her tone at all. "I'm going to sit here for a bit." He heard, rather than saw, her sit down on her porch steps. The small sound of it, the slight settle of someone taking a seat. He stayed against the wall. The thing about these episodes, the thing he'd never been able to adequately explain to anyone who hadn't had one, was that the timeline was entirely internal. On the outside, it might be 10 minutes or 40. He never knew. On the inside, it was much longer than either of those, a duration that had nothing to do with clocks, measured in the slow return of ordinary perception, in the re-establishment of sensory data that confirmed present reality against the other reality that had briefly been more available. He became aware of the air temperature. Cool. September. California. He became aware of the smell. Dry grass and something floral from Vivian's garden, night-blooming stock, she'd mentioned it once. Very specific smell, not from anywhere else. He became aware of the oak tree at the edge of his yard, which he had fallen out of at age 9, and which was unmistakably and specifically the oak tree at 14 Sycamore Street, present tense, verifiable. He became aware, gradually, that the trembling in his hands had decreased to a level that was manageable rather than total. He let out a long breath. And then, because she was still there, on her steps quietly, he said, "I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize," she said. I saw a loud, unexpected noise happen, and a person respond to it." She said it plainly. "That's what I saw." He finally pushed off the wall. His legs were functional, which was a mercy. He walked to the top of his porch steps and sat down, because standing felt like too much to maintain. "It's been a while since one was that strong," he said. She didn't ask him to explain. She just waited, in the way she'd always waited. Not passive, but present. The specific quality of someone who isn't going anywhere. "I was in—" He stopped. Started again. "I was deployed. National Guard 6 years ago. 12 months in a place where loud, unexpected sounds meant something specific. My brain apparently kept the information." He said it with the flatness of someone who has said it enough times that the clinical distance has become second nature. Most days it's not. It's fine. It's been mostly fine for a while. But certain sounds at certain proximity— "You don't have to explain it," she said. "I want to." And he did, he realized. Not because he owed it to her, not because explanation was required, but because she was there, and she hadn't moved, and she hadn't done any of the things people did that made it worse. The alarm, the excessive solicitousness, the slightly panicked helpfulness of people who need the distressed person to become undistressed quickly so that they can feel okay again. She had just stayed, like weather, like a fixed point. "It's PTSD," he said. "Officially. I've seen people about it. I know what it is. I have tools for it." He looked at his hands, which had mostly settled. "Some nights the tools are better than other nights." "Tonight was harder," she said. "Tonight was harder." A beat. Then, "Is Chloe—" "She sleeps through most things. She's used to— She knows when I'm having a hard night. She's known for a long time, actually." The weight of that sentence sat in the air. She's very good about it. Too good, probably. Better than a kid should have to be. He heard Vivian exhale. Not a sigh, exactly. More the sound of something landing. "She doesn't treat you like you're fragile," Vivian said. "Have you noticed that? She treats you like you're—" She paused, finding the word. "Capable. Like she trusts that you're going to handle it." He hadn't thought about it in those terms. He'd been so focused on the guilt of it, the sense that she'd had to adapt to him in ways she shouldn't have had to, that he hadn't considered the inverse. "She's a good kid," he said. "She is, but that's not just her." Vivian's voice was steady. "That's what you've given her. 4 years of you handling it, imperfectly, in all the ways a person handles something this hard, but handling it. She's watched that. She knows what it looks like." He didn't answer immediately. The street was quiet now. The car alarm long stopped. The distant utility truck visible a block away with its amber hazard lights going. A normal Friday night in a small town with a blown transformer, people already losing interest in going back inside. "You didn't panic," he said. "No. Most people panic, or they try so hard not to that it shows anyway. I've been around. I went through something with a close friend in my 20s. I learned what to do and what not to do." She paused. "Mostly, I learned that what someone in that state needs is for the present to be steady and real, not for it to be handled." "That's exactly right," he said. He stopped. "Thank you. You don't have to thank me either. I'm going to anyway." A pause. "Okay." The lights on the Delgado end of the street were still out from the transformer. The rest of the block was unaffected. Windows lit, the ordinary warm light of houses occupied by people doing Friday evening things. Vivian's porch light burned steadily, the only light on that side of the street, the amber fixture on its unchanged timer. He became aware that he wanted to ask her to stay, not to come over, not to do anything, just to not go inside yet. He recognized the wanting and held on to it without saying it, because he wasn't sure what it meant and he wasn't ready for it to mean anything. "There's something I should tell you," she said. Something in her tone had changed, not by much, but he'd learned to read her changes by degree. "My brother is coming this weekend," she said. "He stays a few days usually. He's—" A pause. "He's protective. He has opinions about most things. I'm telling you so you're not blindsided." "Protective how?" "Protective in the way of an older brother who has watched me make what he considers poor decisions about who I spend my time with." She said it without drama. To be fair to him, 2 of his previous concerns turned out to be valid. He has a reasonable track record. "And me?" "You haven't been a concern," she said. "You've been a—" She stopped. "A neighbor. A person I've come to—" Another stop. "He'll have questions, or he'll have thoughts he expresses as observations. He does that." He studied the side of her profile from across the distance between their porches. The way she was looking straight ahead at the dark street rather than at him. The slight tension in her jaw that she was managing. "Tell me about him," Logan said. "His name is Garrett. He's 36. He runs a private equity firm which tells you certain things about how he sees the world. He married well, as people say, and is happy enough in his life that he has considerable time and energy to apply to mine." "Do you usually listen to him?" "Usually I hear him out and then do what I was going to do anyway, but he makes the hearing out uncomfortable." She glanced across the distance between them, finally. I'm not saying this because I want you to do anything different. You're telling me because it's honest," he said. "Yes." He thought about what Garrett Ashcroft was likely to see. A single father with PTSD, an inconsistent income, and a recently inherited house, and a child, and by any external measure, an uncertain future. He thought about what any reasonable older brother, looking at his successful younger sister, would have to say about that picture. He thought about whether the picture was wrong. "I appreciate the warning," he said. "It might be nothing. He might be on his best behavior. Or he might not be. Or he might not be." She looked back at the street. "I wanted you to know." He nodded, to himself more than to her. Something that had been at the edge of his awareness for weeks. The understanding that whatever was developing between them existed not just between them, but in the world, with the world's opinions and frictions and judgment, had just moved from peripheral to center. It wasn't a bad thing. It was a real thing, which was different. "Vivian." "Yeah." "I'm glad you stayed out here tonight." He said it simply, without dressing it up. "It helped." She was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm glad I was home." Neither of them said anything after that. The utility truck had reached the transformer pole, and 2 workers were out examining the damage, their headlamps moving in the dark. The street had settled back into its ordinary Friday quiet. Chloe was asleep inside number 14, doing the deep, untroubled sleeping of a child who has, in her own way, made her peace with the complicated world her father carries. Logan stayed on the steps until he felt cold, which took a while. When he finally went inside, he checked on Chloe first, the way he always did. Stood in the doorway of her room with the hall light behind him and watched the rise and fall of her breathing, the small, familiar shape of her under the blanket. She was fine. She was always fine when she was sleeping. Whatever he had failed to protect her from in the waking hours, sleep had always been hers entirely. He went to his room and sat on the edge of the bed. His hands were steady now. His breathing was his own. Outside, at the end of the block, the amber porch light was a constant, doing what it had always done, marking the edge of a place where someone had decided to leave the light on regardless of what the night brought. He sat there for a long time before lying down. Garrett Ashcroft arrived on Saturday at 2 p.m. in a car that cost more than Logan's entire consulting retainer for the year, and in the first 30 seconds of meeting him in Vivian's front yard, Logan understood exactly what she had meant. He was a tall man, built like someone who had been athletic in his 20s and maintained enough of it to still carry the posture without the full effort. He had Vivian's directness, but without her warmth, or rather, with the warmth kept at some distance, deployed selectively. He shook Logan's hand with the firm, efficient grip of a man for whom handshakes are assessments. "Logan Mercer," he said, the name landing as a statement rather than a greeting. Garrett Ashcroft, Logan said, matching the register. A half second of mutual calibration. Then Garrett smiled, a real smile, or at least a practiced one convincing enough to pass. Vivian mentioned you'd moved in next door, he said, and that your daughter keeps her honest about the bubble count. Chloe takes an evidence-based approach. I respect that. He picked up his bag from beside the car. I'm sure I'll see you around. It was a dismissal that didn't quite manage to be rude. Logan recognized the category, the kind of social maneuver that leaves no specific mark but makes the shape of the room clear. He nodded, said it was good to meet him, and went back to his own yard. Inside, Chloe was at the kitchen table with the Dog Who Does Math manuscript, which was now in its 4th draft. Was that Vivian's brother? She said, without looking up. Yeah. He's bigger than I pictured. You pictured him? Vivian mentioned him. She turned a page. She seemed a little... She tilted her head. Tighter than usual, when she talked about him. Logan stood in the kitchen doorway. You notice a lot. I told you, she said, entirely without self-consciousness. I'm always listening. He let her be and went to make coffee and stood at the kitchen window looking at the yard. The repaired gate post, the garden his mother had kept for 30 years still producing in her absence. The fence between number 14 and number 22 with its peeling white paint that he'd been meaning to get to. Whatever was coming with Garrett Ashcroft, Logan thought, he wasn't going to manage it or perform around it. He was going to be exactly what he was, a man still in the process of becoming something steadier than his recent history, raising a daughter the best he knew how, standing on whatever ground he'd managed to build. It wasn't much, objectively, but it was his. And he'd stopped being ashamed of what was genuinely his. That felt like something. Outside, in the afternoon light, the porch at number 22 was quiet, the amber fixture dark in the daylight, waiting as it always waited for the dark to come back around. Garrett Ashcroft stayed 3 days. In that time he managed, without doing anything overtly hostile, to make his position on most things perfectly clear. He was the kind of man who communicated through observation rather than direct statement, who would note, in a neutral tone, that Clover Hill seemed like a quiet place to land and let the word land do the work. Who would mention, while watching Logan replace 2 deck boards on Vivian's deck on Sunday morning, that his brother-in-law's firm did commercial real estate development if Logan was ever looking to get back into something more substantial? Who would stand in Vivian's kitchen while she cooked and have a conversation just low enough that the words didn't carry to the yard, but the quality of it did? Logan noticed all of it and said nothing. He wasn't sure, honestly, whether his silence was wisdom or avoidance. He suspected it was some proportion of both. But he'd made a decision somewhere in the hours after Friday night, after the transformer and the wall and Vivian's steady voice in the dark, that he wasn't going to perform anything for Garrett Ashcroft. Not competence, not stability, not the kind of uncomplicated ease that would make a protective older brother relax. He was what he was. The performance would only delay whatever conversation was actually coming. The conversation came Sunday evening. Vivian had taken Chloe, at Chloe's enthusiastic invitation, to see a movie that Chloe had been cataloging for 3 weeks as essential viewing. They'd left at 5:30, Chloe narrating the entire plot premise to Vivian on the walk to her car, in the manner of someone providing essential preparatory context. Logan had watched them go from the porch and had barely registered that Garrett was still in the driveway until the man came and leaned on the fence between their yards. "You want a beer?" Garrett said. Logan looked at him. "Sure." Garrett went in and came back with 2 bottles and handed one over the fence and leaned on his side of it. The evening was cooling. The oak trees were starting to think about changing color at the edges, the first suggestions of autumn showing up in the canopy. For a minute, neither of them said anything. It was the kind of silence that isn't comfortable but is at least honest. 2 people who have been calibrating each other for 2 days and have arrived mutually at the point where calibration is finished. "She doesn't talk about people," Garrett said. "Vivian. She doesn't mention neighbors. She doesn't mention people." He held his bottle by the neck. "She's mentioned you." "She mentioned you too," Logan said. Something in Garrett's expression shifted fractionally. "What did she say?" "That you're protective, that you have opinions, that 2 of your previous concerns turned out to be valid." Logan looked at him directly. She said it without resentment for what it's worth. She meant it as information, not as a complaint. Garrett absorbed this. She's the youngest, he said after a moment. I know that doesn't automatically make it my business, but she built that company from a concept she had at 24, and most of what she was doing for the first 5 years she was doing with people who wanted pieces of it, who saw what she was going to be before she'd fully gotten there, and decided to position themselves accordingly. He took a drink. She got better at identifying that, but it cost her. I'm not interested in her company, Logan said. I know. Garrett said it without pause, which meant he'd already decided that, or had at least decided it was probably true. That's not what I'm worried about. Then what are you worried about? Garrett turned his bottle in his hands. That she likes you, he said. The real kind of like, not the kind that's about excitement or novelty. The other kind. The kind where she rearranges things without noticing she's doing it. He glanced over. She rescheduled a board dinner for a Friday night in August, said something came up. It was the first time in 2 years she's rescheduled a board dinner. Logan didn't say anything. I'm not telling you that as a compliment, Garrett said. I'm telling you because she doesn't do that. She doesn't reorganize herself around people. And when she does, he stopped. When she does, and it doesn't work out, it costs her more than the other kind. I understand, Logan said. Do you? He held Garrett's gaze. The man was not being cruel. He was being honest in the way of someone who loves a specific person and has watched that person get hurt and can see the conditions forming again and has enough self-awareness to know he can't stop it, but not quite enough to stay quiet. I have a daughter, Logan said. I have PTSD that I'm actively managing. I have a career that's rebuilding and a house I inherited and a history that isn't clean or simple. He set his beer on the porch railing. If you're asking whether Vivian could find someone less complicated, yes, probably. Without much effort. Garrett said nothing. But I'm not going to tell you I'll stay away from her, Logan said, because that would be a lie, and she'd overrule it anyway, and we'd both know it. What I can tell you is that I'm not careless with people. I've lost enough to know what the cost is. He paused. And I'm not using her. I wouldn't know how, and I wouldn't want to. The silence after that was different from the one before. Garrett looked at the oak tree in the yard. Something in his posture had changed, not relaxed exactly, but settled differently. My concern, he said finally, is that she might end up carrying something that isn't hers to carry. You're still... He searched. You're still in it, whatever you're coming through. And Vivian is the kind of person who... He stopped. She doesn't know how to be present with someone without being fully present. She's not built for half measures. So if she's in all the way. And if you're still figuring out what you're in, I know, Logan said. I know exactly what you're describing. And it keeps me up some nights. He said it plainly. The specific worry that whatever I'm still carrying might become hers by proximity. That it's unfair to let someone... He stopped. That I don't have the right to bring her into something I haven't finished working through. Garrett looked at him. The assessment in it was complete and open and not hostile. I'll tell you what I told her, Logan said. I'm still healing. I say it out loud because I think the honest thing is more useful than pretending otherwise. I'm not going to get to a place where I'm finished, whatever finished means, and then be safe to know. That's not how it works. What I can say is that I know the difference between leaning on someone because it's easier than doing your own work and standing next to someone while you do it. He looked at Garrett steadily. I know which one I'm doing. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the boards you replaced. On the deck. Yeah. You checked the joists. Standard practice. She said you checked further than she asked. He turned his bottle again. That you went under and checked the whole frame, not just the section under the bad boards. If you're going to do it right. Garrett looked at him once more, the kind of look that is the end of an assessment rather than the middle of one, and then he took a long drink and turned back toward the yard. She's going to give you trouble if you let her get away with the aggressively vinegary salad dressing, he said. She thinks she's measuring, but she's not. Someone needs to tell her. Logan looked at his beer. I noticed. I haven't said anything. She can handle it. Garrett said it with the certainty of someone who knows. She looks like she can't sometimes, but she can. I know that, Logan said. And he did. He'd known it from the first conversation at the fence, the first dinner, the Friday night on the porch when she'd sat on her steps and talked about Mr. Delgado's perimeter lighting in the same steady, unflappable voice while he came back from somewhere difficult. He'd known she was stronger than she looked from the first time he'd seen her face something real without flinching. They finished their beers. The evening went dark around them. Down the block, headlights swung into the street. Vivian's car coming back from the movie. They could hear Chloe before the car had fully stopped, some extended commentary being delivered at full volume. She's something, Garrett said. He meant Chloe. Yeah, Logan said. She argued with me about a game of cards for 20 minutes this morning, and I never had a clear rebuttal. That's standard. She's faster than she looks. Garrett almost smiled. She gets it from somewhere. It was the same thing Vivian had said. Logan didn't know what to do with that either time, so he left it alone. Chloe came up the front walk narrating the film's third act to no one in particular. Vivian followed at a distance, carrying Chloe's jacket that Chloe had apparently left in the car, wearing the expression of someone who had been talked at enthusiastically for 2 hours and found it, mostly, worth it. She glanced from Logan to her brother and back, reading whatever the air between them said. How was the movie? Logan asked Chloe. The dog did not die, Chloe announced. I had concerns. They were unfounded. Important information. I told Vivian to be ready either way, but I was pretty sure it was going to be okay. Smart hedge, Chloe went inside. Garrett picked up both empty beer bottles and said goodnight to Logan with a nod that had a different quality than anything earlier in the weekend. Not warm exactly. Garrett Ashcroft was not, Logan suspected, a man who arrived at warmth quickly. But something. He went inside. The front door of number 22 closed behind him. Vivian came to the fence. Well, she said, we talked. About? Things. He looked at her. He loves you. He's just not especially elegant about it. She looked at the closed front door of her own house for a moment. No, she said. He's not. A pause. Did it go okay? It went honestly, Logan said. Which isn't always the same thing as okay, but it's better. She accepted this, in the way she accepted most things he said, without pressing for more than he'd offered. He'll leave tomorrow morning, she said. Early. He has a thing in the city. I know. She looked at him then with the direct attention that never quite lost its effect, regardless of how familiar it had become. What did you say to him? I told him I was still healing and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. He held her gaze. I told him I knew the difference between leaning on someone and standing next to them. The street was quiet around them. The porch light at number 22 came on as the last daylight failed, on its timer, on its schedule, as reliable as anything in his life had become. And what's the difference? Vivian asked quietly. Leaning on someone means they're holding you up, he said. Standing next to them means you're both standing. You're walking in the same direction. Neither of you is carrying the other, but neither of you is alone either. He paused. That's what this is. For me. She didn't answer immediately. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes after something real has been said and deserves a real moment before anything else. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. He understood it completely. October arrived, and with it the block party that Diane had been orchestrating since August, which turned out to involve a street closure permit, 4 separate grills, a bounce house that none of the adults had been expecting, but all of the children immediately colonized, and a folding table that sagged under the weight of assembled potluck dishes. Logan brought his mother's potato salad, made from a recipe he'd found in her handwriting on an index card tucked into her cookbook, the card worn and spotted with use, the handwriting smaller at the end where she'd run out of space and added notes in the margins. He'd made it 3 times in the weeks before to make sure he had it right, and he'd gotten it right on the 3rd attempt, and Chloe had declared it acceptable, which he'd taken as the high praise it was. Vivian came with a pie that was technically not a potluck dish, but which no one complained about. He watched her move through the neighborhood that afternoon with the ease of someone who has made a genuine home somewhere, not the performed ease of a person working at it, but the real kind. The kind that shows in how you know which neighbors to introduce to each other and which ones to strategically keep on opposite sides of the folding tables. She knew the Delgados well enough to tease Mr. Delgado gently about his lighting situation, and she knew the couple on the far end of the block who had a new baby and clearly hadn't slept in weeks, and she brought them plates of food without making a production of it. She was good at this, the actual human work of being present in a place and with people. She was better at it than Logan was, and he watched her without trying to hide that he was watching, and at one point she caught him at it from across the gathering and did not look away, just held the look for a second before the conversation she was in pulled her back. Chloe had located Juniper within 30 seconds of arrival, and they had both disappeared in the direction of the bounce house. Twice over the course of the afternoon, Chloe appeared to collect food and eat it at speed before disappearing again. The third time she appeared, she brought Juniper with her, and they ate standing up, and Chloe reported without being asked that a boy named Marcus had been hogging the bounce house entrance, but that the situation had been resolved. "How?" Logan asked. Chloe looked at him with patient, mild eyes. I explained the social contract to him. Logan decided not to inquire further. He talked to Reed about contractor recommendations for the deck, and to one of the newer neighbors about the school's aftercare program, and to the Delgados, who turned out to have known his parents better than he'd realized. Mrs. Delgado had a story about his mother bringing her soup every time anyone in the Delgado household had so much as a mild cold, which she delivered with the specific warmth of someone describing a person they genuinely loved. He stood there listening to a story about his mother and felt the grief of it and didn't try to manage it. Just let it be there, alongside the afternoon and the noise and the ordinary living presence of the neighborhood. When the block party wound down in the early evening and the tables were being folded and the bounce house was deflating with a sound that Chloe described as deeply undignified, Logan found himself at the edge of the gathering with Vivian, both of them with paper cups of lemonade that had been made by someone with a firm commitment to sweetness. "Good afternoon," she said. "Yeah." He looked at the street, the neighbors carrying things, the last of the daylight going gold over the rooftops. "Really good, actually. Mrs. Delgado was talking to you for a while. She told me about my mother." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "Good things?" "Very good things." He looked at his cup. "The kind you want, and also the kind that take a minute to get through." "Yeah." They stood there in the comfortable quiet of two people who have, without exactly deciding to, become necessary to each other's ordinary days. Then, in the third week of October, Logan had a hard week. It came without a specific trigger, which was actually the harder kind. Not the response to a loud sound or an acute situation, but the slow gathering kind, the kind that builds over a few days from an accumulation of small things. A phone call from the VA about a follow-up appointment he'd been putting off. A dream he couldn't fully remember but woke from at 3 in the morning with the specific residue of it still present. A gray Tuesday where everything took twice the effort it should have, and the effort itself felt like proof of something unflattering about his resilience. By Thursday, he'd gone quiet. Not conspicuously. Chloe still got breakfast and the school run and homework time and dinner, and none of that showed any seams. But Vivian would have noticed the way she noticed most things. The slight withdrawal in the evenings, the front porch sessions that didn't happen. He knew she noticed. He also knew she wasn't going to say anything about it unless he opened the door. On Friday evening, his phone showed 3 messages from her sent over the course of the week, each one brief, none of them requiring a response. The first, Tuesday. Leftover soup in a container by your gate. No obligation. The second, Wednesday. Chloe told me your retainer client renewed. That's good news. The third, Thursday, the most recent, sent at 9 in the evening. Porch lights on. It's always on. That's all. He read that last one 3 times. He sat with his phone in the dark of his bedroom, Chloe asleep down the hall, the house quiet around him, and the way it was quiet on the hard nights. Not oppressive, just present. He looked out the window. The amber light at the end of the block burned steadily, on its timer, on its schedule, indifferent to whether he was watching it. He picked up his phone. "I'm okay," he typed. Having a week. Not the worst kind, just the slow kind. He paused, then added, "Thank you for the soup." And the other thing, 3 dots. Then, "Take whatever time you need. We'll be here. We." She'd written we, not I, not I'll be here. We. Including herself and Chloe in the same word, the same patient waiting, without making a production of it, without requiring anything from him in return except the basic acknowledgement that he was still in there somewhere and hadn't gone entirely quiet. He put the phone face down on the nightstand. He lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and listened to the house breathe around him the way old houses do. The small expansions and contractions, the sounds that are only sounds, the ordinary language of a structure that has been standing through many different people's hard weeks and come through all of them. He thought about what Garrett had said, about Vivian not being built for half measures, about the cost of that. He thought about what he'd said in return, the difference between leaning and standing beside. And he thought about the slow weeks, the ones without a specific cause, and how for 4 years he'd gotten through all of them alone, and how that had been the only available option, and he'd done it. He'd gotten through every single one. But alone had a cost too, an accumulating one. And he'd been paying it for so long he'd stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a sound that never stops. The message was still on his phone. "We'll be here." He closed his eyes. Outside, at the end of Sycamore Street, the porch light burned on in the autumn dark, steady and amber, doing what it had always done, marking the edge of a place where the light stayed on regardless of what the night brought or how long it lasted. He came back on a Saturday. Not back in any dramatic sense. He hadn't gone anywhere physically. He'd still been at the house every morning, still walked Chloe to school, still made dinner and sat at the table and answered her questions about homework and refilled her water glass and done every single thing the day required. The going away had been internal, the slow retreat into a quieter part of himself that he sometimes needed without knowing how to explain it to anyone who hadn't experienced it. The slow weeks were like that. They didn't announce themselves and they didn't leave cleanly. They just gradually thinned the way fog does, not lifting in a single moment but becoming incrementally less present until one morning you realize you can see the whole yard again. That Saturday morning he woke at 5:50 and lay in the dark for a moment and took inventory the way he'd learned to, the practical kind. Not emotional excavation, just a simple check of what was present and what was functioning. His hands were still. His breathing was his own. The specific weight that had been sitting on his sternum since Tuesday was, if not gone, then smaller, more portable. He got up and made coffee and went to the back porch and sat in the early October air, which had a chill to it now that hadn't been there in September. The real arriving of autumn, no longer just its suggestion. The oak tree in the yard was half turned, the leaves gone gold and rust at the outer edges, the light coming through them in the particular amber way it does in October when it's low, and the angle is different from every other month. He sat with his coffee and watched the light change and didn't try to do anything with what he felt. Just let it be there. Just let the morning be the morning. At 7, Chloe appeared at the back door in her pajamas, with her hair sideways and her rabbit under one arm. She looked at him with the quick, measuring assessment she always gave him on mornings after a hard stretch. Not anxious, just checking. Taking her own inventory. "You're outside," she said. "I am. Early. Getting later now that you're here." She came out and sat beside him on the bench, close enough that her shoulder was against his arm. She didn't say anything for a minute, just sat there with her rabbit in her lap, looking at the garden in the same direction he was looking. "The tomatoes are mostly done," she said, "for the season. They'll come back." "Next year?" "Next year." She considered this with the brief accepting gravity she brought to most facts about how the world worked. "Are we staying?" she asked. He looked at her. The question was direct in the way all her important questions were. No preamble, no softening, just the thing she actually wanted to know. "Yeah," he said. "We're staying." She nodded, once, as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected but had wanted to hear out loud. Then, "Is Vivian staying?" "She lives next door, Chloe. She's not going anywhere." "That's not what I asked." He looked at his coffee. She was 7 years old. She was going to make someone's life either very organized or very complicated in approximately 25 years. And he already felt slightly sorry for them. I know what you asked. So? So I don't know yet, he said. But I'm not running away from finding out. She seemed to find this a reasonable answer. She leaned against him a little more, and they sat there together until the sun came over the roofline and hit the garden in full, and then she went in to have breakfast, and he finished his coffee and went to get dressed. At 8:30, he knocked on the door of number 22. Vivian answered in the kind of clothes that meant she'd been up for a while. Jeans, an old flannel shirt, her hair back. She had a dish towel in her hand that suggested she'd been in the middle of something in the kitchen. She looked at him for a moment without saying anything, reading whatever the morning had written on his face, and then she stepped back from the door. "Coffee's made," she said. He went in. The kitchen at number 22 was, as it always was on weekend mornings, in the comfortable disorder of actual use. Dishes in the drying rack, a bowl of fruit on the counter, the jigsaw puzzle she'd migrated from the dining room table to a folding table in the corner, still in progress, a new one. The world map finished and replaced by something architectural, a European city at night. He sat down at the kitchen table. She poured him coffee and sat across from him and waited. "I should have texted more," he said. "During the week, I knew you'd seen the withdrawal, and I just didn't have it in me. I know that. I'm not apologizing for needing the time. He stopped. "I'm apologizing for disappearing without saying I was going to, because that's different. You deserve the courtesy of me saying I was in a slow week and I'd be back." She looked at him steadily. "You did say, on Friday night, after most of the week. Logan." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it without immediately deflecting it." He held her gaze. "Okay. I knew what the week was when it started. I could tell by Tuesday." She set her mug down. "And I decided not to knock on your door or push on it because you didn't need me managing it. You needed to work through it. That's a choice I made, not something that happened to me. I left the soup and the text because I wanted you to know the door was open, not because I needed you to come through it on any particular timeline." She paused. "The week wasn't something you did to me. It was something that happened to you. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "Garrett said you're not built for half measures. He's right. He said when you're in, you're all the way in, and that when things don't work out, it costs you more. Also right." She looked at him without flinching from the direction of the conversation. "What's your question?" "I don't know if I'm going to stop having hard weeks," he said. "I don't know if the slow ones or the sharp ones are going to become less frequent or just more manageable. I've been told both things by people who are qualified to say them, and I genuinely don't know which is true for me. What I know is that this is the terrain." He held her gaze. "And I think you deserve to know that clearly. Not as a disclaimer, and not because I think you can't handle it, but because you've been straight with me from the beginning, and I owe you the same." Vivian was quiet. Outside, somewhere nearby, a bird was doing something elaborate in the garden. The kitchen had the quality of a room where something real is happening, and both people in it know it. "Can I tell you what I see?" she said. "Yes?" "I see a man who walked into a town where everything reminded him of grief, with a 6-year-old and $37. Yes, she told me, in the ant farm phase. She tells me things. And built something real here in 4 months." She didn't look away. "I see a man who has a hard week and comes back from it, who goes to the school night even when it costs him, who checks the joists when he only needed to replace the boards, who keeps index cards with his mother's handwriting and makes her potato salad correctly on the 3rd try." She paused. "I see someone still in it. I know that. I also see the direction." He didn't say anything for a moment. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It had the quality of something settling rather than something stuck. "I'm not looking to be saved," he said. "I know. You'd be insufferable to try to save anyway." She said it with the direct, dry honesty that had been one of the first things he'd recognized about her, the quality that had made him trust her before he'd had a reason to. "I'm not interested in saving anyone. I'm interested in—" She stopped. Tried again. "I'm interested in what's already here, in you and Chloe, and the person you're becoming on the other side of all of this. What if the other side takes longer than expected? I'm not going anywhere, she said. I live next door. Something in him that had been braced for a long time, that had been holding a position against an anticipated pressure that never came in the form he'd been expecting, let go. Not dramatically, just released, the way a held breath releases when you finally stop needing to hold it. I don't know what I'm doing, he said. Nobody does, she said. Anyone who says they do is either lucky or lying. He almost smiled. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be comforting, it was meant to be accurate. He looked at her across the kitchen table in the morning light, at the person who had left soup by his gate and sent a text that said the light's always on and sat on her porch steps talking about a neighbor's perimeter lighting while he came back from somewhere difficult. The person who had looked at everything he was and not found it something to be managed or rescued or waited out. I want to be someone worth your time, he said. I want that clearly and seriously. You already are, she said, equally clearly and seriously. That's not the question anymore. He reached across the table. She put her hand in his, and they sat like that in the kitchen at number 22 for a while, with the coffee getting cooler and the bird still doing its work outside, and the morning going on around them in its ordinary, unhurried way. Neither of them said anything else. Nothing needed to be added. The weeks that followed had a different quality than anything before them. Not easier in any dramatic sense, not suddenly uncomplicated. Life in Clover Hill in November was still life, still the actual demanding, difficult daily thing of it. But something had been named, and the naming had changed the shape of it. He didn't move in. That wasn't what happened, and it wouldn't have been right. Chloe needed her home to remain hers, and Logan needed to still be the one putting her to bed and finding the shoes she always left in the wrong places, and making breakfast and being the reliable constant in her specific 7-year-old world. That didn't change. It wasn't supposed to change. What changed was the permeability between the two houses on Sycamore Street, the way evenings sometimes ended at number 22 rather than number 14, with the three of them at the kitchen table and the jigsaw puzzle getting less theoretical, and Chloe narrating the European city into existence piece by piece. The way Saturday mornings sometimes started with Logan's coffee happening in Vivian's kitchen because he'd knocked at 8:30 and the coffee was already made. The way Chloe stopped making any distinction between the gardens, her grandmother's tomatoes and Vivian's roses occupying the same mental category, tended with the same unquestioned investment. The hard moments still came. That was important to say. They still came. In November, there was a difficult night around the anniversary of his wife's death, which he'd told Vivian about in advance this time, sitting on the porch 2 nights before and saying it plainly. Thursday is a hard day every year. I'll be okay, but it's hard. She'd said okay and hadn't treated Thursday like a project. She'd shown up at the gate with dinner she'd made and said Chloe had already told her she wanted pasta, which was either a coincidence or his daughter running logistics again, and they'd eaten it together, and afterward Vivian had gone home and he'd sat with the quiet of the night and the grief of the day and gotten through it. Not easily, not perfectly, but through it. And the next morning Chloe had put a drawing on the kitchen table before she left for school. Not presented, just left there, the way she left most important things. He'd found it when he came downstairs. A house with a lit window, just one. And underneath, in her best handwriting, still slightly uneven because she was 7. Hi, Dad. Today is Friday. He'd kept it. It went in the wooden box with the teeth. In December, Garrett came back. He came for the weekend, and this time there was no fence conversation, no 2-beer assessment. He came and found what was there to find. His sister making dinner with someone in her kitchen, easy in the way of people who know each other well enough to be irritating, arguing over whether the garlic was adequately browned, a 7-year-old doing homework at the table with the dog-eared dedication of someone who had accepted that Friday homework was the price of a weekend with no obligations, and a man who was not performing anything for anyone's benefit, and who looked, in his kitchen on a Friday evening in December, like a person who had found the approximate place where he was supposed to be. Garrett sat down at the table and helped Chloe with her homework, which turned out to involve fractions, which turned out to involve a 20-minute spirited disagreement about whether Chloe's method was technically correct, even if unconventional. It gets the right answer, Chloe maintained. It gets the right answer this time, Garrett said. That's all I need. Logan looked at Vivian. She looked at him. Something passed between them that was entirely without words, just the specific private exchange of two people who have arrived at the same amused recognition at the same moment. Later, when Chloe was in bed and the kitchen was cleaned up, and Vivian was inside with the wine she'd opened, Garrett stood on the porch with Logan for a few minutes in the cold December air. I was wrong about some of what I thought, Garrett said. You were right about most of it, Logan said. The part I was wrong about was the direction. He looked at the yard. I thought you were still in the middle. You're not. You're past the middle. Logan looked at the bare oak tree, its branches black against the December sky. I don't think there's a clear line for past the middle. No, but there's a quality to how someone carries it. You carry it differently than you did in September. Logan thought about this. He thought about the October morning on the back porch, the inventory, the specific feeling of the weight being smaller, more portable. He thought about the VA appointment he'd kept in November, the first one in 8 months, the therapist who had said something about integration rather than resolution, that the goal wasn't to stop having the history, but to have it without the history having you. He was still working on that. He would probably always be working on it. But the working itself felt different than it had. Less like punishment, more like maintenance. The difference between fighting a fire and tending a furnace. She's good, Garrett said. I know that. I mean, she's good for this. He gestured generally at the house, the street, the situation. She's been better since you came. She works a lot. She always has. But she used to come home to an empty house and stay in it. Now she comes home to... He stopped. To something else. Logan looked at number 22 through the bare trees, the warm light in the front windows, the amber of the porch fixture. She was already good before I got here, he said. I didn't make her better. We work alongside each other. Garrett nodded. That's what I mean, he said. That's exactly what I mean. He went in. Logan stayed on the porch a moment longer in the cold air, his breath visible, the December sky wide and clear and salted with stars. Down the block, the street was quiet, the houses wrapped in their particular winter warmth, the last of the fall leaves long gone, and the bare trees doing their honest winter thing. No pretense of fullness, just the actual structural truth of them visible now, and still standing. He went inside. Spring came the way it does in Northern California, not as a dramatic announcement, but as a gradual accumulation of evidence. The plum tree in the Delgado yard went pink and ridiculous in March, and stayed that way for 3 weeks. The days started arriving with more light at both ends, the mornings no longer dark at 7, the evenings stretching further past 5. Things that had been dormant in the yard started doing things again. His mother's garden sending up the first suggestions of what would be another season's production, the roses on Vivian's fence putting out tentative new growth that she monitored with the attention of someone invested in the outcome. Logan had signed the retainer extension in February, permanent now, or as permanent as anything in consulting was. 3 days a week of reliable work that he did from the desk he'd set up in what had been his parents' study, surrounded by books he'd pulled from boxes and arranged on the shelves with the deliberate investment of someone who is not planning to leave. The 4th client had become ongoing. A 5th had come in through the 2nd. He'd started something new in March, which he'd been circling for months without being ready to start. He'd gone back to the VA, not just for the appointment, but for the group they offered on Tuesday evenings. 8 men and 1 facilitator, and a conference room with bad coffee, and the specific quality of honest conversation that only happens when everyone in the room has already stopped pretending. He'd gone the first time with the private conviction that it would be uncomfortable, and he would not go back, and he'd been right about the uncomfortable part and wrong about the other. He told Vivian about it on the way home from the 3rd session, driving back through the dark with the heater on and the radio low, and she listened without interruption or reaction until he was done, and then said, "How is it?" "Hard," he said. "Useful. The combination is the point." "Yeah," she said. "That's usually how it works." He glanced at her. "You're not going to say something encouraging." "You don't need me to say something encouraging. You need me to treat it like a normal thing you're doing because you're someone who does hard, useful things." She looked at the road. So, what are you making for dinner Saturday? He almost laughed. I don't know. What do you want? Something that's not pasta. Chloe has requested pasta every week for 6 weeks, and I love her, but I'll make the chicken thing. The one with the olives? Yeah. Make extra olives, she said. I'll bring wine. That was how it was. That was how it had become. Not arranged or decided or constructed, just accumulated the way the real things do, out of small, consistent choices made over time without ceremony. The dinner that happened because both of them were hungry and neither of them wanted to eat alone. The Saturday morning coffee that was now just assumed rather than proposed. The school run on the days when Logan had an early call and Vivian had a later start, which had become a standing arrangement that Chloe considered entirely unremarkable and Juniper had accepted as a fact of the universe. It wasn't perfect. It still wasn't perfect, because that was the honest thing about real life and real people and real love, and he'd stopped expecting perfect somewhere around month 3, and found, to his genuine surprise, that imperfect was actually more reliable. Imperfect had texture. Imperfect had the specific quality of something you keep choosing because you want to, not because it's easy. There was a Tuesday in March when they argued, an actual argument, not a gentle disagreement, about a decision she'd made about her house without mentioning it first, a renovation she'd arranged without thinking to say anything because she was accustomed to making decisions alone, and he'd found out from Chloe of all people and had arrived at number 22 more reactive than he should have been and said something with an edge to it that hadn't been entirely fair. She'd pushed back. She'd been right to push back. She'd said, evenly and without cruelty, that her house was her decision and she didn't owe him a consultation, and he'd said that wasn't the point. The point was the assumption that he wasn't part of the equation, and she'd said that if he wanted to be part of the equation, then he needed to be clear about what part he was playing because she was not a mind reader and never had been. That had landed. He'd sat with it for a night. Not retreated, not gone quiet. Sat with it, which was different. The next evening he'd come over and said, standing in her hallway without softening it, "You were right. I was reacting to feeling peripheral and I put it on you sideways. That wasn't fair." She'd looked at him for a moment. "And I should have mentioned the renovation," she said. "Not because I needed your permission, but because it's a habit I have. Making decisions in my own lane without accounting for the fact that my lane now intersects with yours. I'm working on it." He'd nodded. "Are we okay?" she'd said. "We're okay," he'd said. And they were. Not because the conflict hadn't been real, but because they'd both been honest about what it was, and neither of them had required the other person to be something other than what they were. That was the thing he hadn't known how to do before. He'd been so focused, for so long, on not being a burden, on keeping the interior architecture of his difficulties private and managed, that he'd lost the ability to be in a disagreement without it feeling like a failure. As if conflict proved something. That he was too complicated, too damaged, too much. As if the only acceptable version of himself was the one that made no demands and generated no friction. What he understood now, slowly and imperfectly, and with the ongoing help of Tuesday evenings in a conference room with bad coffee, was that the absence of friction isn't intimacy. It's just distance that looks comfortable. Real intimacy requires the willingness to be wrong in front of someone, to be reactive and acknowledge it, to bring the actual difficult self, rather than the managed version, and trust that the other person can handle it. Vivian could handle it. She'd been telling him that from the beginning. He'd just needed to believe it. April arrived. Chloe turned 8 with the seriousness of someone who has been waiting for this specific number. She'd requested a party with a small and rigorously curated guest list, Juniper, 2 other girls from school, Logan and Vivian. No more, she specified. Quality over quantity. They had it in the backyard, which had finally become fully theirs. The garden tended through the winter, the gate post standing firm, the fence between number 14 and number 22 repainted in a Saturday afternoon project that had somehow ended up involving Chloe supervising the paint application with the authority of a small general. Vivian made the cake. It was slightly lopsided, and the frosting had been applied with more enthusiasm than precision, and Chloe, who in any other context would have noted these imperfections with her customary accuracy, looked at it with an expression that Logan recognized as the one she reserved for things she found genuinely moving but didn't want to make a fuss about. It has extra sprinkles, Chloe observed. Allegedly, Vivian said, the sprinkle distribution was not fully controlled. I like it, Chloe said. Good. Make a wish. Chloe looked at the candles. 8 of them, plus one more. Logan had added the extra candle that morning without explaining why, and she hadn't asked. She looked at them for a moment with an expression of a person who has already made her wish some time ago and is only now being given the formal occasion for it. She blew them all out in one go. Later, when the other girls had been collected and the backyard had been somewhat restored and Chloe was inside with a book she'd been given as a present, too absorbed in it to acknowledge the cleanup, Logan and Vivian sat on the back porch in the late April afternoon with the leftover cake between them and the garden doing its new spring things all around. She didn't tell you her wish, Vivian said. She never does. Do you know what it was? He thought about the conversation in October, the early morning, the back porch. Are we staying? Is Vivian staying? I have a pretty good idea, he said. Vivian looked at the garden. Me too. He looked at her. At the person who had left her porch light on before she knew anyone was coming, who had met a man standing against a wall in the dark and talked about ordinary things in an even voice, who had made lopsided cake and accepted tomatoes over the fence and argued honestly and stayed. I want to tell you something, he said. She turned toward him. I moved back here because there was nowhere else to go and I was out of options, he said. That's the honest version. I didn't have a plan. I had a house that was paid off and a kid and the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding things together alone for so long they've forgotten what the alternative feels like. He held her gaze. I didn't come here looking for anything. I wasn't ready for anything. I'm not sure I'm all the way ready now. She waited. But He stopped, started again. I'm glad I came back to this street. I'm glad you leave the light on. I'm glad Chloe counted bubbles and you had a pitcher of lemonade and the gatepost gave me a reason to stand in the backyard long enough for you to come out the back door. He paused. I'm glad you stayed on the porch that night. She looked at him for a long moment, not with the suppressed emotion of someone about to cry, not with the inflated sentiment of a movie moment, just with her own particular quality of full, direct attention, the thing she brought to everything that mattered. I leave the light on, she said, because my mother started doing it when my father worked night shifts. She said she wanted him to know the house was awake, that someone was awake in it. She looked at the garden. He died when I was 12. She kept doing it, said it stopped being about him and started being about something else. The idea that a lit house is a different thing than a dark one, that the light means the door is open. She looked back at him. I never stopped doing it because I never had a reason to, and then... She stopped. And then you were sitting on your porch steps at 2 a.m. on the worst night of moving into an empty house, and something about that, I don't know. Something about it, he agreed. She looked at the porch railing. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what this is, she said. I knew what it was getting to be by August. I've been going at your pace because that's what you needed, not because I was unsure. I know that. I just want it said plainly, she said. Since we're being plain. Say it, he said. She looked at him. I love you, she said. You and Chloe both. Not the version of you that's finished healing or the version that has it all figured out. The actual current version, the one who sits on back porches in October and checks joists. He doesn't have to check and makes his mother's potato salad on the 3rd try. She didn't look away. That's who I love. He'd known it was coming. He'd felt it approaching for weeks, had been feeling his own version of it building to the same place. And still when she said it, plainly and directly, and without any of the protective hedging he would have expected from himself even a few months ago, still when she said it, something in him responded in a way that wasn't prepared for, a fullness in the chest that was not the grief he knew well, but something of a related structure, something that shared the same territory. I love you too, he said. Not eloquently, just accurately. I have for a while. I've been getting there, getting to a place where I could say it without it feeling like something I didn't have the right to offer yet. You have the right, she said. I know that now. They sat with it for a moment. with what had been said and what it meant, and the particular quality of a spring afternoon where something real has just been named out loud, and the world has not shifted dramatically, but has become, somehow, more precisely itself. Then Chloe appeared at the back door with her new book, examined them both with a glance that took in everything and filed it, and said, "Is there more cake?" "Yes," Vivian said. "Can I have some?" "It's your birthday," Logan said. "You can have whatever you want." Chloe considered this. "Can I have the piece with the extra sprinkles?" "That was the arrangement," Vivian said. "Good." She came out and sat between them and accepted the plate Vivian cut for her and opened her book and read. And that was that. The three of them on the back porch in the April afternoon, Chloe reading with her fork in one hand, Logan with the cooling coffee, Vivian with the last of the afternoon light in her face. No moment, no swelling of anything, just the actual good, ordinary, specific texture of a life being lived by people who have chosen, repeatedly, and without ceremony, to live it together. He thought about what it means to be broken and healing at the same time, because that was the real thing. Not the recovery narrative where the damage ends and the healed person begins, clean and restored. The real thing was both at once, all the time. The PTSD that still had its nights. The grief for his parents that still arrived unexpectedly when he found his mother's handwriting somewhere or caught the particular angle of afternoon light in her kitchen. The grief for his wife that had its annual hard Thursday and its daily quiet presence in the face of his daughter. All of that. Still there, still real, still requiring the ongoing work of carrying it without being buried by it. And alongside all of it, this. The yard in April. The girl reading between them. The woman beside him who had said "I love you" with the same directness she'd brought to everything from the first lemonade pitcher, who had not required him to be finished before she allowed herself to start. You do not have to be whole to be loved. That was the thing he'd spent 4 years not understanding. He'd operated on the unexamined belief that healing was a prerequisite, that you owed the people who mattered to you a version of yourself that had been repaired, that the unfinished version was a burden no one should have to accept. He'd been so committed to not burdening anyone that he'd managed to mostly be alone for 4 years, which had its own costs, which he was still accounting for. What he knew now was that the unfinished version of a person is not a burden. It's a person. It's just a person, doing the actual human thing of being in process, the way everyone is in process whether they admit it or not. The difference is not between broken people and whole ones. It's between people who are honest about what they're carrying and people who aren't. Honesty doesn't make you a burden. It makes you real. And real is the only thing worth loving, because anything else is just loving an idea of someone, and ideas don't have hard Thursdays or slow weeks or hands that tremble sometimes in the dark. You find people who stay through the actual thing. That's the whole of it. You find the ones who don't need you to be finished before they begin, and you stay through their actual thing in return, and you build something in the space between. Not perfect, not clean, just honest and warm and lit from the inside. That was what the porch light had always meant. Not come here if you're ready. Just, there's someone awake in here. The door is open. The evening came on slowly, as April evenings do. The light going golden, and then softer, and then dim. The garden settling into its dusk quiet, the first few stars appearing over the roofline before full dark had arrived. Chloe finished her cake and her chapter and announced she was going to water the tomatoes while there was still light, which she did with the unselfconscious authority of someone who has claimed a task and made it hers. Logan watched her move through the garden, her grandmother's garden, now hers by inheritance and daily investment, with the bone-deep specific love that still, after 8 years, arrived without warning and sat in him like a stone in a wing at the same time. Vivian leaned against him slightly, just the warm press of a shoulder, and he let himself lean back, just slightly, and they watched Chloe tend the garden in the last of the April light. Later, when the dark had fully come, and Chloe had been persuaded inside and bathed and read to and put to bed with the rabbit and the new book placed carefully on the nightstand for morning, Logan stood on the front porch for a moment before going in. The street was quiet. The oak trees were in full April leaf now, green and complete overhead, their branches meeting above Sycamore Street in the tunnel he'd driven through on the first night. The fireflies would come back in a month or so. The block would get loud again in the summer. The Delgados would tend their vegetable garden, and the kids from the far end would run through the sprinklers, and the neighborhood would do its full warm season thing. He would be here for all of it. That was certain now in a way it hadn't been in July. He was staying. Chloe was staying. The house at number 14 was becoming, slowly and actually, a home. He looked toward number 22. Vivian was on her porch, cross-legged on the bench with a book he couldn't read the title of, a lamp inside giving her just enough light to read by. She wasn't looking at him. She was just there, doing her Friday evening thing, the same as she'd always done. The porch light was on, the amber fixture on its timer, on its schedule, burning with its characteristic steadiness. The same light that had been the only thing glowing on a dark July street when he'd pulled in at 2 a.m. with $37 and a sleeping child, and the specific exhaustion of a man who has been alone for too long and knows it. The same light that had been on every night since, through August's heat and September's explosion and October's slow week and the winter and the argument in March and the birthday cake with the extra sprinkles. Always on, reliable as anything he knew. He was about to go inside when Vivian looked up from her book, across the dark space between their porches. "You could just stay," she said. Not as an invitation that required a response, more as a statement of available option. He looked at her, then at the porch light, then back at her. "Chloe'll want breakfast on her porch," he said. "I have eggs." "She's particular about the toast." "I have bread." He stood there for a moment in the spring dark, this man who had come back to a town he'd spent his whole adult life running from and found, in the one house on the street with a light on, the precise thing he hadn't known he was looking for. "She asked me this morning," he said, "if you were staying." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know yet, that I wasn't running away from finding out." "And now?" He looked at the porch light one more time. The amber fixture, steady, doing its quiet nightly work, marking the edge of a place where someone had decided, long before she knew him, to leave the light on. "It isn't guiding us anymore," he said. She waited. He smiled. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere deep enough that it takes you slightly by surprise when it arrives. "It's just our home now." She looked at him for a long moment, and what was in her face was not the resolution of a story, but the beginning of the next long, unremarkable, beautiful chapter of a life. The everyday chapter, the hard and good and ordinary one, the one where nobody saves anybody and everybody stays. "Then come in," she said. "The light's already on." He crossed the porch. He went through the gate. The porch light at number 22 burned on behind him, steady and amber, as it had always burned, as it would keep burning, not because anyone was lost and needed to be found, but because this was where the warmth was, and someone had decided to make that visible from the street, and sometimes that is the whole of what love requires. Not a grand gesture, just a light and the decision to keep it on.